We interrupt this program to bring you...
nightmares.
So I was lucky enough to grow up during a golden age of children's television. We really had it all. Some of the funniest, coolest, and most heartwarming shows that many of us have thoroughly enjoyed for 20 years and counting. And while there were many lighthearted favorites to put on after school, I wouldn't be able to sit here today and tell you that we truly had it all if this era didn't also include some of the dark side too, right? The ones that air after the sun goes down, when your fear of monsters under the bed starts to come out.
You're not perfect.
Luckily for us, in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was, in fact, a banger of an introduction to horror included in this era, that for many of us was actually too scary to watch. Courage the Cowardly Dog was not your average children's cartoon, to say the least. While many kids' shows included a cast of a few friends, a family, often a school, and a lighthearted tone, this show completely rejected those tropes and denied us that comfortable familiarity. In this world, there's no friends, no school, no neighbors. There's just Courage, who acts as a stand-in for a child, with the lovely Muriel and her awful husband Eustace, who all quite literally live in the middle of nowhere.
Right there. Nowhere.
There's a lot of little subtle details that help just make this show feel extra uncomfortable, like the fact that we can never see the parents' eyes. It's kind of like how in Tom and Jerry the parents' heads are always cut off. There's also the fact that we don't have a fun and catchy theme song like most of these other shows, but instead we just got this high-pitched voice on the TV interrupting what we were watching.
We interrupt this program to bring you Courage the Cowardly Dog Show!
In this world, there's extraterrestrial visitors and supernatural disasters regularly. Basically, imagine if you lived in a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. You might have fears of UFOs and aliens, things like that. All those types of fears, yeah, those come true all the time here. Their house is constantly being destroyed or abducted or relocated against their will. This world is flooded with abstract terror, sinister surrealism, cold sweat fever dreams, and utterly diabolical villains.
And tempt me to be naughty.
In this world, the parental figures don't save you, they need saving.
Oh, Courage, help me!
In this world, something bad is always happening. And on occasion, there is no happy ending. So why is it then that all these years later, this show is still so beloved by the very fans that were traumatized by it?
My favorite response, and I've heard this far more than once, is, "You really were the head writer for Courage the Cowardly Dog? Wow, that show f***ed me up so bad. Thank you." Thank you.
Courage the Cowardly Dog, as I've mentioned and even made a whole video on, is one of my favorite shows of all time. I think it is the best cartoon ever made.
It's in my personal Hall of Fame for media that actually managed to traumatize me. Like, this actually fucked me up.
Maybe it's because it counterbalances its darkness very well with zany absurdity. Maybe it's because of how cute this little dog is trotting his way through the nightmares and celebrating the little victories along the way. Maybe it's because underneath all of that terror, it's actually got some really sentimental themes threaded throughout and knitted with love in every stitch. Because in fact, the show wasn't just horror, it was comedy horror. It actually really delicately balances its darkness with lightheartedness. And you need those moments of coming up for air to be able to keep venturing back into the darkness, something that we might get to do later if we're lucky. There's a lot of fantastic voice acting and sound bites that this show brings, and you're going to be hearing a lot of them throughout this video and then probably sprinkled throughout my future videos because
it's simply too good.
First of all, the screams this dog would make. Like, the primary feeling you get from watching this show is definitely the horror. But the more you watch it, the more those screams will start to ground you in reality that it's an inherently funny show too. Obviously, I don't like that bad things keep happening to this poor dog, but when they do, I can't help but have a laugh at it.
Where's Muriel?
Or even a... Like when things start to get real bad, sometimes we might get a good and they were always really inspired in how Courage screamed, weren't they? Like how they animated him. Sometimes his teeth would pop out. Sometimes his eyes would pop out. Sometimes he'd scream through his eyes. Sometimes he'd scream his skin off. Sometimes it'd cut to a different shot where he'd go up to the moon and scream the moon into tiny little pieces. Sometimes he'd scream through a trumpet. Sometimes we'd look at his tongue and it would have 6 smaller mouths screaming. It truly feels like they never wanted to animate him screaming the same way twice, and I really appreciate that commitment to originality. And while we're talking about great noises, sound bites, and vocal stems, we have to talk about the noises that Eustace would make. My personal favorite is, like sometimes he just says, but other times it's like the confusion overwhelms his brain and amasses into a critical hit. Another all-timer is,
Get away from me! Get away from me!
Eustace really is a piece of shit throughout the show, and he'll often abuse Courage, get punished by Muriel rightfully, and then candidly ask,
What did I do?
And of course we see this one every time in the intro theme, as well as throughout the show. He'll pull out this big scary green mask to scare Courage with a
Ooga booga booga!
That mask was originally going to be a gun, and he would actually shoot Courage like they would in Looney Tunes. But then they ended up changing it to make it more child-friendly. But comedy aside, this show really was the intro to horror for a generation. Not just in the way it portrayed such horrifying images, but in the way it paid tribute to classic horror films. Isn't it cool when new artists tip their hats to the artists that they grew up with? It's like how Hanumankind used Project Pat's flow in his new mega hit Big Dogs.
Big stepper, underground methods, top-notch hoes, get the most, not the lizard.
Sicker to sicker, when you see the rims flicker, the paint dripper, ice in my rains glitter.
And did it in a way that actually honors the original. What a wonderful cascade of history. Art's a beautiful thing, you guys. That's why this whole channel is about appreciating it. Courage tips its hat to The Exorcist for inspiring it, and then future artists would watch Courage and tip their hat to that for inspiring them. It's like how this song Crisis comes from Courage, and that song would later be sampled by artists like Josiah. Speaking of artists, there's a lot of questions I have for them. There's a lot of things I want to find out here. Like we said before, how is it that they made a show that traumatized a generation, but still won their hearts in the end? Who is Courage? What is Courage? And how is it different than Fear? Why is Eustace so abusive? What does it mean to be a hero, and what does it mean to be a villain? In other words, what does this all mean? Well, in order to answer all those questions surrounding this traumatizing masterpiece, we need to dive into the minds of those who made it.
Go on, make yourself right at home.
First and foremost, Courage the Cowardly Dog wouldn't exist if it weren't for the mad scientist that is John R. Dilworth.
Hello, everybody. This is John R. Dilworth, and the R stands for Rumpelstiltskin.
It is his insane mind that we have to thank for scaring the shit out of us as kids.
Every single thing was orchestrated by me and my insane mind.
The first thing you need to know about John Dilworth is that he himself is just as much of a cartoon character as any of his creations.
We will see Chicken from Outer Space, the origins of Courage the Cowardly Dog, life in transition. We will see Dirty Birdie. Oh, so many things. And then the most horrific Cowardly Dog cartoons.
His veins pulse with rampant chaos. He's theatrical and animated, yet philosophical and profound.
You know, I said, hey, John, how come you can't see Muriel and Eustace's eyes behind the glasses? He says, because they're spiritually blind.
And he's genuinely opened my eyes to a new level of appreciation for the art form of cartoons.
Absolute bedlam reigned in these studios where cartoon characters survived the most absurd things. You could rip your eyes out and put them back in, and it's not a worry. I mean, you can do this. You can stretch your tongue out, roll it back up, and it could beat against your mouth, and you'll be fine. You can get run over by a giant truck back and forth, and then walk out flat, and then you're back to normal. It was magic. You could just experience anything. So it's really quite an experience for the mind.
I think the two key influences that John credits the most are this era of cartoons, and he specifically names Tex Avery.
Major influence is Tex Avery, who was part of what they call the golden age of Hollywood American cartoons, the late 30s and 40s and very early 50s.
As well as this silent film era, particularly the work of Charlie Chaplin.
If you look at Charlie Chaplin, this is cartoon, this is animation, this is performance art, and he is among my greatest influences. Even today in schools, animators study the way Charlie Chaplin or these performers from a very early period, the way that they performed.
Abbott and Costello, they were a ridiculous comedy team, but they made serious horror films. These influenced me. That you can have stupid business going on while death is beating down the door.
If you've seen my Kendrick video, you know that one lens I like to use to view an artist's growth is this metaphor of climbing the mountain, which illustrates how one must focus on both study and practice in order to maximize improvement. But there's another more popular metaphor that aligns quite well with this one that I find very relevant to talk about here. It's Ira Glass's closing the gap metaphor. You heard of this one? Only some of you?
Jeez. Guess I'm just gonna have to cook.
All of us who do creative work, we get into it because we have good taste. Do you know what I mean? Like, you want to make TV because you love TV. You know what I mean? Because there's stuff that you just, like, love. But it's like there's a gap. That for the first couple years that you're making stuff, what you're making isn't so good, okay? It's not that great. It's trying to be good. It has ambition to be good, but it's not quite that good. But your taste is still killer. And your taste is good enough that you can tell that what you're making is kind of a disappointment to you. A lot of people never get past that phase. A lot of people at that point, they quit. You gotta know it's totally normal. And the most important possible thing you could do is do a lot of work. Do a huge volume of work. Put yourself on a deadline, because it's only by actually going through a volume of work that you're actually going to catch up and close that gap. And the work you're making will be as good as your ambitions.
And it's true. Any artist that you admire for their wonderful art has made a high volume of lesser art in order to get to those miracles. It's once again like this image of the plate juggler that I mentioned before. This is the war of art, a subject that many artists have spoken about. Iterate, iterate, iterate. I believe it's precisely for these reasons that Mr. Dilworth is so consistent with his answer when everyone asks him what led him to animation.
So John, how did you get into animation?
With a pencil.
So how did you design,
With a pencil, man.
Well, I mean, how did you...
What made you get into animation? A pencil. Did anything, like, inspire you to, like, you know, just get in there?
How did you get into animation, even during your youth?
Well, it all started with a pencil, John. Pencil. I think it was a number 2.
You might think he's trolling, and he definitely is aware that he's like being kind of silly, but there's something very real that he's getting at.
Tell us how it started.
I don't want to occupy too much time on these details, but Courage was really started with, seriously, one of these.
Yeah.
That's right. So anybody can do it.
So an artist, like John for example, starts out with their pencil and begins making things over and over for years, refining not just their skills, but their ideas too. So John started out with some pretty wild stuff.
Fungus, do you have belly bloat?
At this stage in his career, John often reflects on the evolution of recurring character types in his work.
Was it always meant to be an elderly couple and a dog, or?
Oh, yeah. There's always a 3, for instance. A female of some higher intelligence, but that's off somehow. A very unsympathetic male character. And then this third, innocent.
It's really interesting that something in his soul always wanted to get these ideas out. Thankfully, he iterated throughout the years to eventually get his skills and ideas refined enough to the point to make Courage.
You know, that short informed Courage. It's an early version of Eustace, Muriel, and Courage. You could see the evolution of Hamilton in Courage. Hamilton was a more introverted character, much more sensitive. But Courage is more active now. He evolved to action, despite fear.
So it is through this continuous learning and iteration that one not only climbs the mountain of artistic ability, but closes the gap between the amazing ideas in their mind and the actual things that said artistic ability allows them to create. You climb the mountain to close the gap. It's an infinite game with an infinite prize of having more and more effectiveness in bringing your ideas to life.
Do you feel like you wrote your best verse yet?
My best verse yet? Nope.
Damn.
Nope. I'm always searching for that.
always searching for that next thing that, inspired me within writing. It could be another word, it could be another concept, another song, another album, but it's just a challenge. It's just a search to write that perfect verse or that perfect song.
God damn it, art is cool. And thus, John R. Dilworth became a fully evolved Pokemon and was now ready to take his big idea to the big networks.
I went to the studios, pitched my cartoon idea in my spacesuit. I'm going to reenact my successful pitch to the Cartoon Network. It's called Courage, the Cowardly Dog. And it's about an orphan dog rescued by a nice old lady, Muriel Bag, who lives with her farmer in the middle. Shut up! Sit down! But creepy things happen in nowhere, and it's up to Courage to save the farm!
But given the approval of the concept, now it came time for execution, and in order to do that, John needed the Avengers to assemble. Okay, voice actors. What does this little dog sound like anyway? John searched tirelessly through everyone in New York City, but nothing was clicking. Hope was looking dim. Enter Marty Grabstein.
John Dilworth, he's developing this new show called Courage the Cowardly Dog. He's listened to every voiceover artist in the city and can't seem to arrive at a decision. Over 300 voices. I went in and just somehow went with my instinctive interpretation of what this character might be sounding like, and he fell in love with it. I am convinced that John was not sure exactly how Courage was supposed to sound until I came in. And he goes, that was really funny, but okay, how about this, Marty? Try it where you take your natural, ridiculously gravelly, scratchy voice and pitch it up here like this. Go like that. And I said, okay. And he goes, that's it.
I do think Marty's voice ended up perfect for the show.
Yay! Oh no, not more.
And after consuming all 102 episodes with my eyeballs pressed against the monitor and volume on full blast, I do agree with her decision to actually reduce Courage's dialogue after about halfway through season 1.
I think we did maybe 6 episodes before Mike Lazo suggested that we should do without it. And I agreed, because in the original short film, Courage did not speak. But doing a series, it's scary to think that you're going to rely on a star that doesn't say anything, I mean, it was a good move.
I think so too. While I do like these little moments where Courage is saying something, like, for example, in the first few episodes, I like this running joke of,
I have a bad feeling about this. My name is Ivana, and it's not. Something smells fishy, or my name's Schlinkenhofer. And it's not. Oh, there's something wrong here. Or my name is Jose Santos de Guatemala. And it's not.
And I don't even mind this episode where he's having a full-on therapy session with the Shadow, but I think the bulk of the episodes function fantastically with action speaking louder than words. And in that way, it makes it a very unique show that your main character can't talk most of the time. He'll still chime in and say something every now and then.
Oh no! What do I do? What do I do?
But I think used sparingly, it's actually much more effective. It all comes back to what John was inspired by to make art in the first place, and how he wanted to take that inspiration and put it back into his own thing.
What I wanted him to do was be more like a Charlie Chaplin and use his body as language.
Letting the events themselves play out with just a bit of dialogue from Muriel, Eustace, or that episode's villain works phenomenally. Speaking of villains, as we've mentioned before, your heroes can only shine as bright as the villains are dark. And so we're going to need some killer voices on board for them too. Enter Paul Scheffler.
Well, I went into an audition at Don Case, and they were looking for the character of Katz, which was this really sophisticated looking character. And I thought, maybe I'll try the voice of James Mason for this character. It felt right. And if anyone knows, there's an old British actor who used to talk like this. He had a very beautiful voice like this,
Has anyone ever told you that you overplay your various roles rather severely, Mr. Kaplan? I'm quite tired of second place. Second place is no place as far as I'm concerned.
John cast me on the basis of that. And so I came in and did the episode, and I thought, well, that was great. That was fun.
So Paul was pretty much every other freaking voice on the show. He's a jack of all trades.
And while we're at it, we're going to need some killer themes for these villains too. We need some scary music to help set the tone every time they enter a scene or when they're doing something insane.
I'm going to experiment on you with some of my newest products.
Sean, he would come in and he'd say, I kind of like this here. I kind of like this sound here. But he would always accompany by, oh. He was so excitable. He was so hilarious. He would often describe a feeling rather than a kind of music. You know, he'd say, I want this to be like really dark, man, really dark. It's scary, really scary.
The network is going to order a bunch of episodes to air, so we need to bring in some talented writers who can tune their frequency to John's vision and then write for it as if it's their own.
I believe the primary element to all of this is writing, being able to communicate a story, whatever the story is.
Enter David Stephen Cohen.
You know, it was very much me getting in sync with how John was twisting things, and I was becoming happily twisted.
Shout out to the What's in My Head podcast for landing interviews with so many of these artists and producers. Their conversations very much helped my research and has resultantly improved the quality of this video. So go check them out for a whole lot more interviews of creators of these shows from this same golden era that we're talking about here. And in my eyes, one of the most important people involved in the show as a producer is Linda Semensky. I believe Linda is a shining example of what a film producer should be, as she ultimately stands for all the things that will benefit the art first and foremost.
Like a book editor. My job was to do the best possible version of this person's idea. I was helping them to do it by just basically looking out for them back at the network and explaining the goals of the network to the people at the show.
In the business of art, there's an infinite push and pull between the two. You want to maximize artistic quality, and you have to deliver things on time to make money. And neither would thrive without the other. There must be a balance. But it really can feel like a constant back and forth between the business and the creative.
Because I wanted to do the opposite of what everyone before me had done. You know, it's like you read all these stories about, you know, how tough the executives were. And I always thought, well, I'm just going to be on the side of the animators because that seems like the winning approach. You know, I always felt like, you know, I was there to defend the people making the cartoons. And I was happy to do that.
9-second applause.
It takes a skilled producer like Linda who knows when to get things done and when to remind ourselves that, in fact, a deadline is just a made-up date on a calendar, and that at the end of the day, nobody really cares that your thing came out X days or weeks late. The only thing that really matters is if they'll look back on it fondly for the rest of time.
And I always used to joke around about all the shows and say, I don't think they give prizes for best on time schedule. You know, I think it really all comes down to, will they stand the test of time? And if they need a little extra time to do that, we can do that.
When a piece of art is great, nobody will give a flying if it came out a few days late. Don't believe me? You know I'm a huge Kendrick Lamar fan. When he came out with The Heart Part 4 just before his 2017 album Damn, he epically ended the song with,
Y'all got till April the 7th to get your shit together,
implying that that's exactly when the album would drop. It was so hype, and he did the same thing with The Heart Part 3 just before Good Kid Mad City.
when you let hip-hop die on October 22nd.
But guess what? This time in 2017, just before Damn, he actually pushed it back a week. Damn actually came out on April 14th, 2017. How could the great and powerful Kendrick Lamar go against his word? He prophesized the date. How could he push it back a week? Because here we are 7 years later, and no one remembers that it got pushed back a week, but everyone remembers that Damn was an amazing album, and it still is to this day. So Linda's 100% right. When art is published, it is immortalized as it is forever. So do it right, even if it takes the extra few days, to make sure that the way that it is forever is something that you're really proud of. You're doing the Lord's work, Linda. Seriously, this woman is one of the guiding forces behind this golden era I talked about growing up with.
When I look at your resume, everything you worked on was hit after hit after hit after hit after hit.
Hit after hit after hit is right. And they even paid tribute to her with a sitar that she played. They have Muriel playing it in several scenes throughout the show. So now that we've met some of the key figures behind the scenes that made Courage a reality, now it's time to meet the key figures in the scenes that made Courage horrifying. Villains are the most important thing in a horror show, right? Even if not people, but supernatural forces, there has to be some force that brings about darkness on the main cast, and Courage has tons of them. This show is a goldmine of villains. The one that most fans will be quick to recognize and recall is undoubtedly King Ramses.
King Ramses' curse. It did immediately remind me of how scared I was when I first watched this episode. It was extremely unnerving. And I'm not alone either. 22 years later, this is still one of the most talked about horror moments in all of kids programming.
Return the slab, or suffer my curse.
the King Ramses curse thing, right? That one, just based on my experience with the convention people, that almost everybody, that is their favorite episode. I think a lot of it really has to do with the simplicity of this three-dimensional image in a two-dimensional world. And that was Dilworth, by the way, right?
Yeah.
Return the slab, or suffer my curse.
What makes this episode go from good to great is the elevation from horror to horror comedy. Because as horrific as King Ramses is, it really is the unbothered, greedy reply from Eustace that is the cherry on top.
What's your offer?
Because faced with the threat of not one, not two, but 3 plagues, this man will negotiate with supernatural beings over some cash.
What's your offer?
Which, as this comment points out, is actually a really polite thing to do. Like, he doesn't have to give Eustace this heads up, but he does. What a gentleman. So I think King Ramses is definitely the most recognizable and most remembered, but the darkest, the most sinister, for lack of a better term, the most f***ed up villain has got to be Freaky Fred.
Is there any episodes or characters that stand out to you both as being, what you would imagine would have been someone's scariest episode?
Freaky Fred. I read so many things, and people said so many things. People have contacted me and said that you scared the bejesus out of me when I was a kid, and I think that was a real risk for them to do that character.
In my book, Freaky Fred is second to none. This episode is cursed. The devil is in the details. Through this demonic poem, we learn about the life of abuse that Fred has conducted, while our poor dog is trapped inside of the bathroom.
It was a day I'd not forget. The day that I first met my pet.
Keep in mind, all this narration we're hearing from Fred are the words inside his head. He says that at the beginning.
Hello, new friend. My name is Fred. The words you hear are in my head.
I wrote Freaky Fred with a friend of mine who I met while working on Seuss, Bill Marsili, and he wrote King Ramses. He's a wonderful writer. I do have an affection for Fred because it's in verse. I mean, I remember walking with John Dilworth, and he said, I want to do an episode about a freaky barber, evocative of Sweeney Todd, certainly. I don't remember if he brought up Sweeney Todd at the time, but he said, I'd like to do it in verse.
And oh, such fuzz it does demand.
He tells us about his pet that he couldn't help but shave.
That I be naughty.
This girl Barbara that he couldn't help but shave.
Barbara, my love was named, and her fair hair are mane untamed.
And then this older man that he couldn't help but shave. This is dark art. Okay.
Some of those episodes were very dark. Some were frothy, but some really twisted.
Not only is he reciting in his head this dark poem that sounds like if Dr. Seuss and Edgar Allan Poe made a baby, it's his constant smiling throughout the episode. He twirls before he shaves the last bit of hair off of Courage's bum. Even when he gets taken away at the end, presumably back to some mental facility.
With love, Fred.
As if nothing wrong was done. This is one of those episodes where there just is no resolution. It's just like some dark shit happens and then it ends. Like, diabolical. Diabolical synonym, please, because I can't keep saying that. Diabolical cinnamon, fiendish, satanic, hellish, wicked, wicked, unholy. It's just 11 minutes of some unholy madness, thanks to Fred. And then there's Dilworth's favorite villain, the one who set the tone with the very first episode, Katz.
Welcome to the Katz Motel. I'm Katz.
Katz is such a diabolical I see, there it is again. Katz is a pretty satanic fellow. The way he splits the family up and makes sure that they are so by peeping through his paintings and shower heads, only so that he can feed them to his mutant spiders.
There were notes from time to time, but my favorite note, which didn't come from Linda, it came from Standards and Practices. It's room 666. Right?
Yeah.
And the note was, we're going to get complaints, so can you just change the number? I made it 666 and a half.
I knew it!
And it was fine.
When it's time for Courage to confront Katz himself, there's only one way to resolve the conflict. Games.
One of my favorite things about the show was when they come to the head of a confrontation, then they do something like they salsa dance or something, or they get in an intense game of badminton or something, or...
Right, so how do you resolve conflict? Think back as a child. It would be games.
This is true.
Yeah, so it's just a formula.
Yeah.
It's a formula of mine to resolve conflict, not with violence.
Do you actually think about it that way, though, when you
Sure.
were creating it? Were you like, I'm going to play on my childhood, or like...
No, not me specifically, but it was deliberate to use childhood games and play to resolve conflict as a contradiction to the adult world of aggressive dominance, right? The stronger prevails, the most brutal prevails. Yeah, that's going to happen anyway, right? But to defeat somebody in checkers, it's humiliating.
Katz is a repeat villain. I think it's for good reason. He is one of the best villains.
Welcome to Club Cats. I'm Katz.
But on Club Cats, he's not feeding them to spiders. Now he's up to something else.
Now I'm up to something.
Terrible things happen here.
Who's Katz putting on this entertainment for?
Tonight, for your enjoyment, Eustace the Wrecking Ball.
There is no crowd. He just has an applause machine. Why did he mastermind this whole new club to put this performance on? Is he mad? So off the top, those are some of the most horrifying villains, but there's other flavors of them too. Like I said, this show is a goldmine of them. One of the funniest is Schwick.
Name's Bushwick, but call me Schwick. Just Schwick. Don't ever call me Bushwick.
Where are you from?
Bushwick. You can call that Bushwick, but not me. Me, you call Schwick. Just Schwick.
LeQuack is pretty funny too, and he's another repeat villain.
Qu'est-ce que c'est?
The Goose God is very funny. And then I'll throw Cajun Fox in there too. I love his sunglasses, and especially when he takes them off. Cajun Fox is just a cool guy.
Hey, man. How you doing?
And who could forget Shirley the Medium, another fantastic recurring character in this universe. The way she helps Eustace contact his dead brother.
Just dial my dead brother and shut up.
Join hands.
That's just brilliant. Extra points to Shirley for always referring to Eustace as the stupid one.
The stupid one. He's stupid, right?
And what's this eye she has anyway? You know, it's a little different. It's not like a Sharingan or a Rinnegan. Call that the Shirleygan. The Chicken from Outer Space is a classic because it's the one that started it all. In the self-titled short film that was Oscar nominated, this would be what became. Courage Revenge of the Chicken from Outer Space is crazy because the chicken is cooked. It's literally cooked and it came back to destroy Courage. It took Eustace's head off and put it on itself. I personally hated blood-sucking stuff growing up, so seeing the evil Weevil was wild. Watching how nimble and skeletal Muriel and Eustace are after the Weevil sucks most of their blood out, it's pretty scarring. Look at this. His man has been reduced to a small puddle in a bag, and it's not even the first episode something like that has happened. Which reminds me of the Snowman. The Snowman is another one of the funniest villains. He gets a couple episodes, rightfully so.
And Hohauser. He was a ton of snow.
You gotta throw some appreciation to Benton Tarantella. He appears in Everybody Wants to Direct, and then again in Angry Nasty People. And then I think there's just like one annoying character in the whole show, and it's this guy. And they definitely made him that way on purpose. But he does offer some really good moments like this one. I bet you can think of at least a few guys that are unironically like this in real life.
I only had a nickel. Now, I own 3 apartment buildings and a fleet of limousines.
Here in my garage, just bought this new Lamborghini here. Fun to drive up here in the Hollywood Hills.
All you have to do to learn the secret of my success is send me money.
And there's a couple more key villains that we'll pay a visit to later, but the last one that I'd like to mention for now is the Puppet Master, the Magician, the Great Fusili. This guy in this episode are special for a few reasons. It's one of those episodes where the conflict is actually not resolved. There's no happy ending. This episode is the root of a popular fan theory, that this twisted ending from the season 1 finale is what actually is the rest of Courage's existence in the following 3 seasons. It's like Sasori and Naruto, whose parents have passed but have been turned into puppets, playing pretend that they're still alive to love him. And while we're talking fan theories, we have to address one of the most popular ones besides this, that this entire show is an exaggeration of reality, that Courage has an overactive imagination due to anxiety or perhaps schizophrenia, and that it's all just in Courage's head. We'll get into these theories a bit more in chapter 6, which is all about art and the interpretation of it, but for now I'll just say that the most important thing is how art makes you feel. So with either of these theories or any other ones that you can can think of make you feel something greater, then go with it. That's like the whole point. There's tons of department that go into filmmaking, but there's one that really stands out with this show in particular, and for that reason, it deserves its own chapter. Believe it or not, even though we have long called them pictures or motion pictures, audio is actually the backbone to cinema. Real ones know. I think that's why you can watch, air quotes, watch, from the other side of the room while you're cooking dinner, or while you're eating dinner, or on your second monitor while you're playing Brotato. You can get a lot of the key information from sound alone. The music sets the tone, the dialogue conveys the information, and sound effects fill in the details. What's exceptionally notable about Courage the Cowardly Dog soundtrack is that so much of it is original.
We wrote pretty much a different theme for every single villain.
That's insane.
You know, because it's like people don't do that. You know, so it was extra work. We didn't really care. We just wanted it to be cool.
Reminds me how all the major villains in Naruto had musical themes, which was very effective in conveying their powerful dark presences. A lot of these themes have millions of views just because they're so iconic in and of themselves. Shout out to Pain. He was a perfect villain.
He was a ton of snow.
For any Naruto fans out there, people that just notice how much I reference Naruto, don't worry. We'll get there one day. That one's gonna be a big video. Even bigger than Crisis, Catastrophe, and SpongeBob.
Are you gonna be able to handle that? I hope so, because it's coming.
One of the first examples that comes to mind in speaking about exceptional music in this show is Human Habit Trail. You know what a habit trail is? I didn't, and I had 4 gerbils growing up. Well, it's a pretty f***ed up episode. Dr. Gerbil is an actual maniac. Go figure. But in the climax of this episode, there's a chase scene with Courage in the dock, where they make this inspired choice to actually mute all of the sounds except the music. It completely subverts our expectations and makes a really beautiful scene.
And John was constantly wanting us to do cinematic stuff and stuff that was different.
Bringing it back to Freaky Fred, his music was actually so psychedelically disturbing that it's intoxicating. I love when a fan base comes together. It's a lot like how Bikini Bottom came together in Band Geeks, another episode with a fan-made reanimation. Haha! Fans are awesome because they make the best creators, if you ask me. I say that to say you don't want any mega moron executives that stare at spreadsheets all day trying to min-max and calculate what best thing they should make to make the most money. You want fans. People that are fans of great art. People that appreciate great art to be the ones making it. And I believe it's for those reasons that Dilworth and his team felt compelled to make such innovative decisions. And that led to the show being as iconic as it is today. So there was a lot of fantastic original music in this show, but when they did use music that was not original, they were very tasteful in which songs they selected. Like, they used the Ode to Joy in this episode. Are you kidding me? Actually, maybe that was one of the original ones. I can't believe Courage the Cowardly Dog invented the Ode to Joy. And of course, we arrive at arguably the most significant musically themed episode in the Tower of Dr. Jalost, another fan favorite.
The one that's the most effective one for me, haunting anyone, is the Tower of Dr. Jalost. I really, really like that score. It's very, very integrated into the show. I'm using the same theme every time, and then at the end, it becomes very major. And a lot of fans love that show. They're constantly writing me about that show.
Yeah.
Like, how did you do it? I sat at the keyboard and I played it.
They went fully cinematic with this one, that's for surezies.
You missed one. There's a happy person.
In both the Tower of Dr. Jalost and Curtain of Cruelty, Eustace is the only one in the world that it has no effect on.
He must be immune to emotions.
That is a hilarious detail.
I'm a lousy storyteller, but somehow I find some emotional components that I grab onto.
While Dilworth may think he's a lousy storyteller, and everything about film school will teach you that story is king, editing legend Walter Murch agrees that emotion is actually the only thing that overtakes it in terms of importance. It's a highly recommend book for any editors out there, just filmmakers in general out there, art appreciators out there. Get the book In the Blink of an Eye by Walter Murch. As an editor, he comes up with a list of priorities, and at the very top of that list is the emotion. And his reasoning is, when people walk out of the theater, what they're gonna remember above all, even above what happened in the story, is what they felt. That's the number one thing that people remember about any film, or arguably about any piece of art, is how it made them feel. Remember how Jody said that John would always describe a feeling when talking about what music he wanted?
He would often describe a feeling.
Well, Christopher Nolan did that exact thing with Hans Zimmer when working on Interstellar.
He wouldn't tell me what the movie was about. I sat down and I wrote this piece about what it feels like to be a father.
I thought it was absolutely perfect and captured the emotional qualities of the film that I wanted. I think what that did is it set him very firmly in a direction relating to the heart of the film.
At the end of the day, all these different people, all these different departments that are contributing to an art piece, it all just adds up to create an effect on the viewer or an emotion.
The most important thing is the effect upon the viewer.
They really had no business making this show go this hard in the yard. They could have turned in some crap and called it a day, but instead they went the extra mile of crafting so many original songs just so that it was well tailored to the episodes they were working on. And it's all because they wanted to continue that beautiful cycle of inspiration.
And that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to make sure that there would be shows that people would like as much as I liked Bugs Bunny when I was growing up.
Well, that's a beautiful thing, but what does it all mean anyway? Is it all just a bunch of colors and voices, just a bunch of sounds and images? Just a bunch of bullshit on the TV, am I right? It doesn't mean anything, it's just a bunch of bullshit, am I right? We're going to look at Courage through the lens of open interpretation, because that's the beauty in art, especially art that frequently uses abstract symbolism. I mean, that's the whole game of subjectivity, using symbols that might carry inherent meaning and putting them in a scene that evokes an emotion, likely causing the human being to derive meaning from it. And it's not just me that's saying this is the way that the creator of this art wishes for the world to see it as well.
Art is for interpreting. I know what my show is about, but I'm not going to tell you. You give it the meaning that means something to you.
I 1000% agree here. If Dilworth or any other creators were to come on some interview and tell us, oh yeah, the rest of the show is Courage controlling the puppets. Oh yeah, the whole show is in Courage's head. Well, then the whole imagination and guessing game is over.
In Masked, were the rabbits and
Why remove the clothing of a beautiful thing?
Okay, so you're not going to answer it?
What's the point then of trying to decipher true meaning or unintentional meaning in a thing?
So you rather leave it open for interpretation?
Art is that.
The whole point of art is that it gets your feelings going, gets your imagination going, and that's the effect that it has on the viewer. Take Courage in the Big Stinkin' City, for example. There's a lot of teasing and build up to what's behind that door.
You want to know what's behind that door? You don't want to know what's behind that door.
And although we learn it eats everything off a person but their bones, and we get to hear it slurp for a second, we never actually see what it is. And once again, if the creators of the show were to tell us that, oh yeah, that's an alien, or oh yeah, that's another bug just like Schwick, well then that defeats the whole guessing game. It defeats the whole magic of imagining what might be back there. Rather than connecting those dots for us, it gives us one dot and allows our imagination to finish the connection. This is how some forms of therapy work. Look, they literally do this in an episode. Eustace connects the dots with what's in his head, and Muriel connects the dots with what's in hers.
I see a beautiful butterfly who only wants to make her husband happy.
Boom.
I see a woman hitting a guy on the head with a frying pan.
I'm not just making shit up. I actually mean what I say. I think a lot of great artists see things this way. The BoJack Horseman creator feels the same about how fans interpret the last episodes of his show. It's useless to try to control people's perceptions. It's so much better to just go with the flow of the subjective perspectives of interpretation by using things like symbols and double or triple entendres. Artists love using things that carry inherent meanings and multiple meanings. It's good for the art experience, motherfucker. So now we understand that John's meaning that has resonated with him during the creation of this art can coexist with someone else's personal experiences and interpretations with the same art, and so on with mine and yours and the rest.
There's all these fan theories about how nowhere is like either purgatory or hell or something.
Oh, I get so many of those. I love them all. I love them all. I'm not going to become a stuffed shirt and tell somebody their theory is wrong. They're all correct. Who's to say you can't look at artwork and say, this is it?
So in talking about symbols, what am I talking about? I'm talking about Courage plunging into the darkness in Queen of the Black Puddle. That's a great metaphoric example. Meaning types will love this one. Oh my god, do we love a good set of abstract symbolism to derive meaning out of. Oh, I'm gonna derive meaning out of this art so hard. What about this blonde girl playing the violin? In terms of subjective interpretations, it's now time to talk about heads of beef, which is a great example to explore that it was all in Courage's head theory. Because this episode is really like that. Courage gets a bad feeling from this place and this pig, and when a customer disappears, Courage starts to think that they took him, and maybe even ate him. Courage connects the dots to those in his head, and comes with this narrative that these must be cannibals. But in this case, Courage is actually wrong, because by the time we reach the end of the episode, we learn that this time it truly was just all in his head.
I would love to feature your work at my gallery of culinary wonders.
He invents a whole conflict where he needs to plunge into the darkness, when this time he actually didn't even have to do it after all. Courage was perceiving things in a way that was immediately flavored with fear, conflating it with everything else that happens all the time at the farmhouse. And if you do subscribe to this theory, I would go as far as to say that you should look at this as the prime example for your theory. You could say that this episode is a peek into the real world as it truly is, where we aren't so submerged into Courage's viewpoint as to see things that aren't real, but rather see things as they really are for a change. If you get more out of the show by looking at it through that lens, then why not? Whatever invokes a greater feeling for you is probably what you should go with.
Art is that.
And what invokes the greatest feeling for me is plunging into the darkness. So while we've explored almost all of the story's key villains, there's one more very important one that we need to understand. Arguably the biggest and inarguably the most consistent villain throughout the entire show, Eustace. For most of the show, Eustace barely ever calls Courage by his name.
Courage!
To us, Courage is the main character. To Eustace, he's just a stupid dog.
Stupid dog!
One that Muriel shouldn't have saved. But why is he like this?
I explored hate through the persona of Eustace, but then I also offered potential reasons for the source of that hate.
The older you get, the more you come to understand that behind that scary old face, there's a broken man underneath.
Can I come hunting with you? No! Please, big brother, no!
Perhaps even, deep within, a broken child. In The Sand Whale Strikes, we see Eustace's mom wish to give up her son's life and his wife's in order to get the sand whale's prize money.
You know how much a sand whale is worth? He can keep me stupid son and his stupid wife. Now row!
So now we know that that's probably where his unending greed and fixation on money over family comes from. In the Mother's Day episode, Eustace's mom hates all of the gifts that he brings her, except for the mirror in the photo. His mom has always been obsessed with her looks. And when his mom gives Eustace his gift to Courage, his inner child starts to peek out.
That's mine! Why don't you ever give me any presents?
She never gave him anything. He's always felt neglected and continues to feel so. Eustace was verbally and emotionally abused by his mom.
Your pa was a real man. You can't fill his shoes.
By his older brother.
See you later, useless.
And he fell into the negative momentum of continuing that cycle of abuse to the next generation, even if it isn't onto his kid, but onto his dog. Being victim to one is an incredibly difficult position to be in, and therefore one of the most difficult decisions in life, to bear such a brutal suffering and still to choose light over dark. They say that that's the only difference between heroes and villains.
Villains and heroes actually have the exact same backstory. Both the villain story and the backstory of the hero are pain. So the difference between the villain and the hero is one thing. It's how they respond to pain. The world hurt me, I'm going to hurt it back. And the hero says, the world hurt me, I'm not going to let this happen to anybody else.
Wow.
It's just literally how you decide to react to pain that either turns you into the victim or turns you into the hero.
One continues that cycle and one breaks it. This is why albums like Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers are so important and so timeless, I predict. It's about breaking cycles of pain and hatred and abuse to create more peaceful lives in generations future. We're getting closer to the source, you guys. Let's proceed even deeper. In McPherson Phantom, I think one of the most important episodes in the whole show, we see her team up with a literal phantom to manipulate her son into believing his wife Muriel is treating him badly, specifically to separate them. That's what level she's on.
I guess it all started with me mom. She never liked me.
Good work, Eustace.
I see a bitter old woman with a bad wig who's in a lot of pain.
That's a big dose of reality.
I'm ugly. I'm ugly.
Then Eustace's mom gets therapy.
It all started out years ago with my mother's Auntie Griselda. She was a cruel woman. Made us all miserable.
And there it is. Now we've learned that this rabbit hole goes pretty fucking deep. This is beyond just Eustace and his mom. Now we can finally make sense of that fear that we felt as a kid. The fear that Courage felt when Eustace abused him. Where was that hate coming from? Why was Eustace like this? Because he's a victim first and then a villain later.
I ain't useless. I'm Eustace.
He's a victim to the patterns instilled in him from his own mother, who herself is a victim to the patterns instilled from her family growing up. These patterns are insidious, and it's very hard to break. It's the right thing to do, but so many don't do it because it's extremely hard, and it's far easier to just pay it forward. There's a moment where Eustace catches a glimpse of what he really is inside. In The Curse of Shirley, the whole day, Eustace's only remaining loved ones are trying to set up for his birthday party in celebration of him. All day, everyone is just trying to love him.
That man should really come to his own birthday party.
But they can't, because the person that really needs to love him is him. Their love can't get through to him until he learns to love himself first.
It's so hot. My head is burning.
Where's your hat?
I don't have one.
No hat? That's not right. Little boy should have a hat.
Courage, you did the impossible. You got Eustace to give of himself.
You either grow or go.
Blah, blah, blah. I ain't growing, and I ain't going.
A villain is a perfect character to have discover empathy.
The stupid one has taken on the pain of his wife. He has learned to give relief and share pain.
No, Ma. You always look good to me.
Now I will show the world the difference between courage and fear.
Courage easily could have just closed his eyes to any of the phenomenon that came a-knocking and then just let events happen as they happen. But that's not courage. Courage is action.
Anything worth its value is worth fighting for.
The heart is a very strong muscle. It really does overcome fear. Nothing that I wouldn't do to prevent harm to someone I love.
You know, life is so terrifying. I guess the only way to survive, you have to be as scary as it is.
That's what gave Courage his courage.
I'll save you. The things I do for love.
Especially people who suffer with a lot of anxiety. We didn't know what to do with our fear. He was the shining example of what you can do, even if you are afraid to tackle something.
And if a little pink dog could face his fears, so could that person.
You've taught me the meaning of the word courage. Courage. Courage.
There's lots of rumors going on about that Courage is modeled after the dog that I had when I was a boy. And it's probably true. missed that dog, but it was a coward.
Courage. Courage. I think you nodded off before I get you the ending.
We are celebrating the life of Muriel Barry, who had helped inspire Muriel Bag, of whose lap courage found consolation from all the terrors of that bored dog's life. And so, my dear Muriel, the one quote she would often repeat: a cup of tea, a friendly chat, a cozy seat, simple things, hard to beat.
And that's the end of the story. Happily ever after.